doctor dies in the emergency room, and what she experienced on the other side will forever transform her view of life. Her name is Mariana Herrera, and she claims her near-death experience revealed something science cannot explain about what comes after death. Is it the end or the beginning of something greater? What Jesus showed her will leave everyone speechless. Stay until the end, as this narrative might change your destiny. I am Herrera, and today, after everything I've lived through, I know that death is not the end but merely the beginning. I never imagined my life would change forever. On that day, I believed in science, in what could be proven with data and evidence. I was an emergency doctor, used to seeing death up close, facing hopelessness in the hospital corridors, fighting for lives when all still. But I never thought that one day the person in question would be me, much less that I would die and return with a message I cannot ignore. What I saw, felt, and experienced beyond the threshold between life and death challenges everything I believed I knew. In that instant, I understood that death is not the end and that what lies beyond is something for which no one is prepared. But before I tell you what I saw, let me take you to the exact moment when everything changed forever. It was an ordinary Tuesday, or so it seemed. My shift at the hospital was to start at 6 a.m. The routine was the same as always. Patients coming and going, nurses running through the corridors, alarms from monitors sounding incessantly. I had been working in emergency for over 6 years. And nothing surprised me. I had seen pain in its rawest form, had come face to face with death so many times that it had become almost mechanical for me. But that morning, something was different. I didn't notice immediately, but something in the atmosphere was different. The emergency room, which was usually overflowing, felt strangely calm, as if the hospital was holding its breath before something big. At 10:30 in the morning, I was attending to a teenager with a broken arm. I remember the sun streaming through the windows, casting shadows on the floor. Everything seemed so normal, so routine, until it happened. Without warning, I felt an unbearable pain in my chest, as if an invisible force was pressing down on my heart with all its might. I barely had time to step back before my entire body collapsed. I couldn't breathe. I tried to speak, to call for help, but the words wouldn't come out. My vision blurred and the sound around me became distant, as if I was drifting away from everything. The last thing I saw before hitting the floor was the patient's voice calling for help. Then, darkness. I was told I had a massive pulmonary embolism. A blood clot had traveled to my lungs and blocked circulation. It was unexpected but not inexplicable. The doctors discovered that I had a congenital clotting disorder I never knew about. My body was a ticking time bomb, and that day it exploded, but the most impactful thing wasn't the embolism. The most impactful was what happened while my heart stopped beating. Because in those 5 minutes that the doctors fought to bring me back, I was no longer there. The darkness enveloped me completely. I couldn't feel my body, couldn't hear anything. There was only an absolute void, an infinite silence, and then something changed. I was floating, not figuratively, literally rising. I opened my eyes, and the first thing I saw was my own body sprawled on the emergency room floor. From above, I could see everything. I saw my colleagues running, saw Dr. Morales performing chest compressions on my chest, saw the anguish on the nurses' faces. Everything moved in slow motion, as if I was watching a movie, but the strangest thing was the peace I felt. There was no fear, just an absolute calm, and at that moment I realized something terrifying. If I could see my own body, it meant I was dead. But that was just the beginning. Because what I experienced next left me speechless. Stay until the end. Because what I discovered beyond death will change everything you think you know about life. I felt no fear, no pain. Just a strange calm enveloping me as I floated above my lifeless body. The scene around me was surreal, as if I was seeing everything from a parallel dimension. I saw Dr. Morales leaning over me, his face tense as he performed chest compressions. I saw my friend and colleague Anna preparing a dose of epinephrine with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. I knew they were fighting to bring me back, but I was no longer there. I was somewhere else, suspended in a reality I couldn't comprehend. What surprised me most was the feeling of weightlessness, as if the weight of my body no longer existed. I felt no hunger, no cold, had no worries. It was just pure consciousness, observing, feeling, understanding. But then, something changed. I felt a force pulling me upward as if being absorbed by an invisible current. It wasn't terrifying, but rather inevitable. And at that moment, the emergency room began to fade. The light from the fluorescent lamps dissolved, and in its place emerged an immense darkness, a void that enveloped everything. It wasn't a terrifying darkness, but rather a kind of transition. I wasn't alone, but I couldn't see anyone either. I felt a presence, something greater than myself, something indescribable. And then I saw a bright light appear in the distance, a light unlike anything in this world. It wasn't the sun, it wasn't a lamp, it was a living, warm, enveloping light. Instinctively, I began to move toward it. Or perhaps it wasn't me deciding to move forward, but rather the light calling me. As I delved deeper into that glow, I felt my mind expand. Suddenly, I understood things that previously seemed impossible to comprehend. It was as if all the questions I had during my life found answers in a single instant. Existence, purpose, the connection between all things, everything made sense. And then I crossed the threshold, and what I saw on the other side defies all logic. It wasn't a physical place, but it wasn't empty either. It was a completely different dimension, filled with colors I had never seen before, sounds that weren't sounds in the traditional sense, but rather vibrations felt in the soul. The air was imbued with such perfect harmony that invisible tears ran through my being. Noah. And then a figure appeared before me. I didn't walk toward it, but somehow I immediately knew who it was. It was Jesus. Not as I had seen him in paintings or sculptures, not as I imagined in childhood stories. His presence was majestic and familiar at the same time. His light was brighter than any star, but I could look at him without feeling pain in my eyes. His energy was pure love, infinite understanding, and in his gaze, I felt he knew every part of me, every thought, every doubt, every fear, every mistake. And yet, in his eyes, there was no judgment, only love. Only love. Jesus spoke to me, but not with words, rather as a message that resonated in the depths of my being. It is not your time yet, he told me with a voice that wasn't a sound, but a certainty. But before you return, there is something you must see. Suddenly the space around us changed. I wasn't in a single place, but in many at once. I saw scenes from my life as if watching a movie in multiple dimensions. I saw moments of joy, moments of sadness, moments when I had helped someone without realizing it. But I also saw the moments when I had failed. Jesus showed me the repercussions of each of my actions. I saw how a simple smile I gave a patient once changed their day, and consequently their way of treating others. I saw how every decision, no matter how small it seemed, had an impact on the world. Then I understood that nothing is insignificant. Every act of love, every word of encouragement, every gesture of kindness, everything leaves a mark on the universe. But what I saw next sent chills down my spine. Jesus showed me a world full of shadows, a world where humanity was drifting away from love, where indifference and selfishness grew unchecked. I saw people trapped in their pain, unable to see the light. I saw tears, hunger, despair, and most disturbing of all, I saw how every decision made out of fear and hatred created waves that spread and affected far more people than we could imagine. I looked at Jesus with anguish. Is this what awaits us? I asked without needing words. His response was serene, but firm. The future is not set in stone. Every soul has the capacity to choose, and every choice, no matter how small it seems, defines the path. Then he showed me something else. I saw a world where love was the guide, where people helped each other without expecting anything in return, where compassion was the foundation of every decision. It was a bright world full of hope, and I understood that both realities were possible, but they depended on us. Jesus looked at me with tenderness and said, "You must return and share what you saw. Not everyone will listen, but those who do will remember that love is the key." At that moment, I felt something begin to pull me. The light began to fade, and a sensation of vertigo enveloped me. I tried to stay, tried to hold on to that world of peace, but it wasn't my decision. The next thing I knew, I was back in my body. I opened my eyes suddenly, feeling the electric shock of the defibrillator coursing through my chest. Dr. Morales shouted, "You, we have a pulse," and relief reflected on my colleagues' faces. But for me, nothing was the same, because now I know what exists on the other side. And I know that the time we have here is more important than we imagine. After waking up, everything was confusing. I felt a burning in my chest, as if something had pulled me from the void and forced me back. I couldn't process what was happening, just heard the distant sounds of voices around me. "We have a pulse," Dr. Morales shouted, but I could barely understand what that meant. I opened my eyes with effort and saw the faces of my colleagues bent over me. Alana, my best friend, had tears in her eyes. She held my hand so tightly I could feel her desperation. Beside her, a nurse sobbed silently. It seemed no one could believe what had just happened. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. I felt the oxygen mask on my face, and the hum of the monitor marking my vital signs. It was then that panic hit me. I shouldn't be here because what I had experienced, what I had seen, wasn't a simple dream. It was more real than anything I had felt before. My body was back in the hospital, but my mind remained trapped in that vision, in the light, in Jesus' words. I looked around the emergency room, recognizing every detail, as if it was the first time I was there. But something had changed. Everything seemed sharper, more vibrant. Every person, every object, every sound had a kind of energy I hadn't noticed before. It was as if my senses had expanded, as if now I could see beyond what was previously visible. The following days were a mix of physical recovery and mental torment. The doctors explained in clinical detail how I managed to survive, how the epinephrine, chest compressions, and defibrillator brought me back after nearly 5 minutes without vital signs. They talked about neurological hypotheses, about possible hallucinations caused by lack of oxygen to the brain. But I knew the truth. What I experienced wasn't a simple biological reaction. I was somewhere else, in a different dimension. And what I experienced there changed me forever. I tried to explain what I had seen, but every time I opened my mouth, I saw disbelief on their faces. Anna was the only one who didn't look at me as if I was delirious. She said nothing. It just nodded, as if deep down a part of her believed my words. But how to explain something that has no comparison in this world? How to describe a place where time and space don't exist as we know them? How to make someone understand what it is to be in the presence of Jesus and receive a message that cannot be ignored? I spent entire nights replaying every detail in my mind, wondering what I should do. Jesus showed me visions of humanity, of a future that depended on the decisions we make every day. He told me that love was the key, that every act, every word, every choice had a greater impact than we imagine. But how to convey this in a world where hatred and indifference seem to grow every day? Then something happened that pulled me from my thoughts. On my second night in the hospital after waking up, I couldn't sleep. I lay staring out the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Suddenly I felt a chill run through my body, not from fear but from a strange sense of familiarity. I turned my head and saw a woman standing on the other side of the room. She was a patient in a hospital gown, dark hair loose over her shoulders. But There was something about her that seemed different. "You saw, didn't you?" she said, with a voice so soft I barely heard. I was paralyzed. What? What?" I stammered. The woman stepped forward, and I knew I wasn't imagining things. "I know you saw because I saw too," she stated with a tone as dense as if time had stopped. "Who are you?" I asked with a thread of voice. "Someone who also returned," she replied, with a slight smile. "But don't we all do that?" I felt a chill on the back of my neck. "What do you mean?" "Some souls choose to stay. Some don't find their way back, and others don't want to return." Her gaze was intense, as if she could see inside me. "He gave you a message, right?" she whispered. My breath hitched. "Yes," I admitted. "Then you must share it because time is shorter than you think." I blinked, and in an instant, the woman was no longer there. The monitor beside me continued recording my heartbeat. The sound of the hospital remained the same, but the chill on my skin was real. I sat up in bed with my heart pounding. Had it been real or just a hallucination caused by my exhausted mind? But deep down I knew the answer. That woman had been there, and what she said couldn't be ignored. I spent the rest of the night unable to sleep. Couldn't stop thinking about that woman, her words, the way she looked at me. It was as if she knew exactly what I had seen, as if she too had been there in that place of light and truth. I repeated to myself several times that perhaps it had all been a hallucination, a product of my mind in recovery. But something inside me indicated that wasn't the case. The next morning I decided to look for her. I got out of bed with difficulty and asked for the patient records from the previous night. But to my surprise, no one matched her description. There was no patient with those characteristics in the emergency room, nor in the intensive care unit, nor in any nearby rooms. It was as if she had never been there. My skin prickled at the thought that she might not have been an ordinary person. From that day on, I began to notice things I hadn't seen before. Small signs, impossible coincidences, moments when I felt a presence beside me, even when no one was in the room. It wasn't fear, it was something else, something akin to a silent certainty. I felt someone guiding me, pushing me to fulfill the mission I had been entrusted with. But how to do that? How to talk about something I didn't fully understand myself? Days passed, and I was discharged. I returned home with my body healed, but my soul in conflict. I had been saved, but a part of me felt I had left something behind, something I still didn't fully comprehend. I tried to return to my routine, but nothing was the same. Every time I entered the hospital, I remembered the exact moment my heart stopped beating. Every time I looked at a patient in critical condition, I thought about what awaited them on the other side. And every time I saw someone clinging to the fear of death, I felt the need to say that death wasn't the end. But who would believe me? It was Anna who gave me the answer. One afternoon, after the shift, we sat in the hospital cafeteria. She looked at me intently before speaking. "Since you came back, you're not the same," she said bluntly. "I see it in your eyes, in the way you talk, in how you look at the patients." "And what did you expect?" I replied, letting out a sigh. I saw something that changed everything. Something I don't know how to explain. Anna nodded. "Then tell me," she said. "Maybe you can't explain it, but tell me what you saw." I took a deep breath. "For the first time since my return," I said aloud, "I saw Jesus." Anna remained silent. She didn't laugh, didn't make a face of disbelief, just waited for me to continue. So, I told everything. From the moment I floated out of my body to the light, the tunnel, the feeling of absolute peace. I spoke about Jesus and his gaze, the things he showed me, how every action in life had a greater impact than we could imagine. When I finished, Anna had tears in her eyes. "You're not the only one," she whispered after a few seconds. "There are many stories like yours. Maybe your mission isn't to convince the skeptics, but to speak to those who are ready to hear." Her words echoed in my head for days, and that's when I understood. I didn't need to prove anything. Didn't need to convince anyone. Just needed to share my story and let it reach those it should. From that moment, everything changed. I began to write down what I remembered in more detail. Every sensation, every image. I sought out other testimonies and discovered that many people around the world had experienced the same. Men, women, children, all with similar accounts. Some saw the light, others saw loved ones waiting, and others saw something else. Although my experience was one of peace, I also felt the weight of the warning. Not everyone returned with the same story. Some came back with visions of darkness, of despair, of places where the absence of love was absolute. I realized that what I had seen wasn't just a message of hope, but also a warning. Jesus showed me two possible futures for humanity. One where love guided people, and another where selfishness and fear dominated. And the difference between the two wasn't a predetermined destiny, but a choice. Each of us decides with every action, with every thought, which path we are contributing to. Then I knew I couldn't remain silent. If I had returned, it was for a reason. If you are seeing this, perhaps it's because you are ready to hear. From the moment I decided to speak, I felt a weight on my shoulders, a strange sense of responsibility. I couldn't simply forget what I had seen. Something inside me pushed me to share, but at the same time a part of me felt fear. What would happen if people called me crazy? What if they thought my experience was nothing more than an illusion of my brain on the brink of death? But then I remembered Jesus' gaze, the calm in his voice, when he told me it wasn't my time yet and that I should return. He didn't bring me back without a reason. So I started writing. I didn't know exactly who this message was for, but I wrote it anyway. For entire nights I sat in front of my computer, trying to put into words what I had felt, what I had seen. Although I couldn't explain it logically, as I wrote, I relived every detail. The moment I floated out of my body, the immense peace and the light, the presence of Jesus and the message he delivered. But the more I delved into my memories, the more questions arose. Why did some souls seem to get stuck between this world and the next? Why did some return with messages of love and others with terrifying warnings? I realized that although my experience had been comforting, there was something more I still didn't understand. So I decided to investigate. I delved into testimonies of other people who had near-death experiences, stories of those who, like me, had crossed the threshold and returned with a message. And what I discovered left me paralyzed. Not all experiences were like mine. Some people described the same light, the same feeling of peace and unconditional love. But others spoke of something completely different, of a dark place, of beings emitting suffering, of a sense of emptiness that seemed endless. I saw accounts of people who claimed to have felt pure terror, as if they had been dragged into an abyss from which they barely escaped. This deeply disturbed me. Why did some see heaven and others something more akin to hell? Jesus had told me that every action had consequences, that the future wasn't set in stone, but depended on our choices. So, did our lives determine what we would see after death? I wanted to understand more. Moi see. So, I searched through ancient texts, spiritual writings from different cultures. I realized that in almost all traditions, the same idea existed. Love as the path to light, fear and selfishness as the path to darkness. Then I remembered something Jesus showed me during my experience. He took me to a place where I could see human choices as waves expanding, affecting not only those who made them, but everyone around them. He showed me how a single decision, based on love, could change a life, and how a decision based on fear could trigger a chain of suffering. I then understood that the message wasn't just about what lies after death, but about how our decisions in life create the future we will encounter on the other side. It was at that moment that I made the true decision. It wasn't enough to write about what I experienced. I had to share it, had to make sure this message reached more people. The first step was to tell my family. I was afraid they would look at me with disbelief, that they would think it was all a product of my recovering mind. But to my surprise, when I told them about what I saw, about what I felt, about Jesus' words, they were silent. There was no skepticism in their eyes, just amazement. My mother was the first to speak with a trembling voice. She said, "I always believed there was something more after death, but what you say makes it even more real." My father, a man who rarely spoke about spirituality, nodded silently. Then I understood that this message was already doing its work, but it couldn't remain just within my close circle. So I talked to more people, hospital colleagues, childhood friends, acquaintances who, for some reason, I felt needed to hear this. And the more I spoke, the more I realized that many people had similar experiences but remained silent for fear of seeming ridiculous. One night, after telling my story to a small group, a man approached me with tears in his eyes. He told me he had lost his wife a year ago and lived tormented by the fear of never seeing her again. "But if what you say is true," he murmured, "then there is still hope." That's when I understood what Jesus asked of me. It wasn't about convincing anyone. It wasn't about imposing a truth. It was about giving hope to those who need it. It was about reminding people that death is not the end, that every action matters, that love is the key to what comes next. And then, I understood the last part of the message. Jesus not only showed me what lies beyond death, he showed me what we can still do while we are here. He showed me that every life has a purpose, and that every person has the ability to illuminate the world with their decisions. Since that day, I stopped fearing death because I know what lies on the other side. And I know that what truly matters is love. Since the day I decided to share my story, my life changed forever. Before my near-death experience, I used to worry about things that now seem insignificant. I anguished over the future, over what others would say, over work stress, over daily problems that somehow always seemed bigger than they really were. But after seeing what I saw, after feeling the absolute peace of that place, after hearing Jesus' words and understanding the magnitude of our choices, I understood that life on earth is just a part of something much greater. And that doesn't mean the problems disappear, but rather that our perspective changes. What once seemed unbearable is now just a small chapter in an infinite story. What once seemed unfair now has a purpose we may not immediately understand. And most importantly, what we do here leaves a mark that goes far beyond our earthly existence. Since then, my mission has been to share this message. I have spoken with hundreds of people who have gone through the same experience, who have crossed the threshold of death and returned with similar stories. And what I've learned is that there is a pattern in all these experiences. Every person who has had contact with the beyond returns with the same truth. What truly matters is love. Not money, not success, not recognition, just love. What? Because when our time comes, we will take nothing but that. We won't take our possessions, nor our titles, nor our material achievements. We will only take what we give, the love we share, the marks we leave on others. And the most impressive thing is that when we reach the other side, we are not judged by divine punishment, but by the clarity with which we can see the impact of our actions. I remember when Jesus showed me how every small decision creates waves that affect those around us at that moment, and how a simple act of kindness can change a person's life, how a word of encouragement can prevent someone from giving up, how an act of love can have consequences that extend for generations. But I also saw the opposite. I saw the pain we cause with our words and actions when we act out of fear, selfishness, or indifference. I saw how the lack of hope spreads when we choose to ignore the suffering of others, and I understood that every day, in every moment, we are choosing between two paths, the path of love and the path of fear. Since I returned, I try to choose love in everything I do. No, this doesn't mean I'm perfect. It doesn't mean I never make mistakes. But every day when I wake up, I remember Jesus' words. Every choice matters. And with that phrase in mind, I do my best to live with purpose, to treat others with compassion, to leave a positive mark on this world. I know there are many people who fear death. I know there are those who live with anxiety, with fear of the unknown, with the uncertainty of what will happen when their time on this earth ends. But I want you to hear this carefully. Death is not the end. There is nothing to fear. What lies on the other side is more beautiful than we can imagine. And if you have come this far, if these words have resonated with you, perhaps it is not a coincidence. Perhaps, as that woman told me that night in the hospital, time is shorter than we believe. Perhaps it is time to start living with more love, to forgive more quickly, to let go of grudges, to value those around us more. Perhaps it is the moment to remember that every action counts, that every word leaves a mark, that every person we meet on our path is there for a reason. Jesus allowed me to return to share this, and now this message is yours. Do with it what you will, but if something inside you felt this is true, if at any moment in this story your heart raced, if something in you knows there is more than we can see, then ignore it. Because love is the key, because love never dies. I am Mariana Herrera. And today, after everything I've lived through, I know that death is not the end. It is just the beginning. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to share it, like this video, comment on which part impacted you the most, and subscribe so you don't miss more accounts like this. Because every time we share these stories, we help more people find hope, peace, and purpose in their own lives. Death is not the end. It is just the beginning.